Well, if you wouldn't look at the time, it's supply chain o'clock. CPUZ and hardware monitor very temporarily were compromised in a supply chain attack. Now, if you're not aware, CPUZ and hardware monitor are very useful tools if you're trying to figure out more information about your computer, voltages, temperatures, and fan speeds. These are great tools. And because of that, the computer building, the kind of tech enthusiast community uses these tools all the time. And unfortunately, they were compromised recently in a supply chain attack that affected a lot of people. Now, luckily for me, I actually use hardware monitor. I had to use hardware monitor when the Intel overclocking issue happened about 2 years ago, and I had to figure out if I had like a bad version of the CPU. Luckily for me, I did not update. Another instance where not updating me saves me from my own compromise. So between April 3rd to April 10th of this year, the download links on these sites, literally where you click and download the piece of software, you click here to get the setup in English or whatever, those links were replaced with a link to a different place, a Cloudflare R2 bucket that served a different version of the exe. That exe would now, out of nowhere, your version of hardware info would have Russian dialogues, and that's a little suspicious to begin with, but it would drop a crypt-based side loading chain. It would use NTDLL processing through .NET assembly to do in-memory execution of some payload, which eventually would call out to this IP address here to do its evil bidding, right? Not a great place to be if you're trying to securely use the internet. Now, there's a few things that make this kind of interesting. First of all, in classic supply chain fashion, this was caught relatively quickly in like a week, which is, pretty short term for a long-term supply chain attack like this. It was caught by people on Reddit talking about, hey, I went to go install hardware monitor 163 and I got hardware info monitors. Just to be very clear, hardware monitor is one tool by CPUID, and then hardware info is a completely separate tool. This is a different tool maintained by a different company used by NASA on the moon, I'm assuming. And what's cool about this, I guess, is that people notice very quickly, oh, wait a minute, hardware info monitor, I didn't want this. I wanted hardware monitor, what's going on? And then very quickly on X, it got caught up where people started posting about it and people working at the company reported on it, and it got caught in a matter of days. And so people downloaded and installed this software and noticed very quickly, okay, A, the file name is wrong. B, it presents Russian language installation dialogues. And an immediate indicator that it was not built by CPUID, which by the way is a French company, right? So French company serving an English compiled or English targeted piece of software is now presenting Russian language dialogues with a different file name. Not a great way to start off your Tuesday, okay? So yeah, again, it uses DLL sideloading, which basically is when a binary depends on a particular DLL, you can ship that same DLL name with the binary with malicious features inside, and because that binary depends on that DLL, the DLL can run malicious code, right? And then ultimately call out to this IP address here on this high port, which Breakglass, who's writing this report, cool report, I'll put the link in the description below. They call out that they did this high port because it would actually avoid detection as a non-standard port. But again, whenever I see in network traffic, any communication going out to a high port like this, like 31415, I'm like, what the frig is going on? Either it's diagnostic software for some weird embedded device, or it's C2 communication. The easiest way to blend in with normal traffic is register a legitimate domain name and just use TLS with Let's Encrypt, and like you're never gonna get caught by anybody unless that domain gets flagged, right? And so that IP address actually is associated to a Hetzner allocation, but is operated by a company in the Caribbean, which is weird. But this is where it gets even more interesting. If you look at the passive DNS traffic related to that IP address in the past, it notes a few other campaigns, right? So a while back, I think it was like March of last year, or maybe it was this year, yeah, a FileZilla campaign. So FileZilla, if you're not aware, also got compromised, right? So if you're a youngin' or you're not like an old 31-year-old like me, you may remember, you may not have heard of FileZilla, but FileZilla is an FTP solution, SFTP, that allows you to connect to servers and upload and download software over FTP, right? This is actually literally how I used to deploy my PHP and MySQL applications on Apache, right? Little WAMP stack, XAMPP. And so this is a fake website that is used to deploy a Trojanized version of FileZilla that was seen back in March of this past year. So if you look at the actual, the traffic related to that same IP address, you'll notice that this same infrastructure was used for that compromise. So we're starting to see I mean, they say a Russian-speaking actor, but to me, it's just somebody that wants to appear like a Russian-speaking actor. So it could be literally any nation in the world, in my opinion, that is using the same infrastructure for a variety of either supply chain attacks that are compromising software, or just literal like typo squatting or SAMO squatting to get people to download Trojanized pieces of software. Now, the question on everybody's mind, right, is how did this initial access happen? How did we get to a place where this malicious content was being served? Well, a lot of the times to do this kind of attack, you have to have either some kind of internal access where like somebody at the company got paid to do this, or they got hacked into, right? And so on CPUID.com, for a long time, apparently, it ran this older version of Apache that was known for 34 different CVEs. Now, a lot of the time, Apache itself is not vulnerable. Apache obviously is a well-documented, well-audited piece of software that is likely to have, as little bugs as possible because everyone cares about a 0-day in Apache, right? But Apache, like any other HTTP server, has a variety of modifications, and one of them is mod rewrite that allows you to change URL requests to Apache. Now, this vulnerability is, again, just a moderate confidence assessment by Break Glass Intelligence on how they think they got it. And guys, every day it feels like there's another supply chain attack where some major package gets hacked and ultimately somebody gets compromised. Their credentials get compromised and ultimately sold on the dark web. And that's why today's video is sponsored by Flare. Guys, InfoStealer malware is compromising employee devices and their credentials are ending up on the dark web. With Flare's threat intelligence, we can see that they've actually collected over 5 million, almost 6 million events of just Stealer log collection in the last 3 months. These Stealer logs have credentials that have been stolen from people just like you and me that use computers. It's honestly insane. And by searching here on Flare in their global search, you can specify what kind of data you want to see. In just the last 30 days, there have been 19,443 collections just on infected devices being captured in Stealer logs, meaning they're pulling credentials off those devices and selling them in some form or fashion on the dark web. What's cool about Flare is all you have to do is put in your identities into the system, no passwords or anything like that. You can just put in your emails, and if one of these gets captured in one of these events, they will send you an email with what they found, and you can compare that against what you know to be true. Guys, with Flare, you can stay ahead of attackers by looking directly into the eyes of the InfoStealer economy. Pretty cool. If you want to see if InfoStealer malware is throwing around your data, go see if Flare is right for you and your organization to stay ahead of attackers. Thanks for sponsoring the video, Flare. Back to the video. So this CVE allows an attacker to map specific URLs to file system locations that are not intended to be served, potentially exposing server-side scripts or configuration files. With write access to the web root or CMS backend, the attacker can modify download links to point to Cloudflare R2 staging buckets. So their assertion here is like, hey, it is possible that inside of the server, there is a YAML file or a JSON file that is accessible via read-write to the Apache server user on the server, right? And so by exploiting the CVE, they were able to have a URL point to that config file, and then we're able to modify that config file to have one of the download URLs point to the Cloudflare R2 staging bucket. And then to make it even more complicated, so this is a Russian-speaking actor, supposedly, based on the installer dialogues, but the infrastructure was registered in a Chinese registrar, using some registrar in Hong Kong, but the devices that were being used, the physical hosting, were actually hosted in an offshore Caribbean company named, I'm not gonna try to pronounce this here. And so what makes this really complicated for people trying to like infer who the threat actor is A, multiple languages, multiple locations, but also B, if you're trying to like prosecute somebody, well, they had the attack server on this random offshore Caribbean company, but it was registered to Hong Kong, but they're technically in Russia, so it makes it very complicated for law enforcement to actually do anything, right? Which is really an interesting way of like kind of spreading out how you get found out. You're a defender trying to stop your network from getting hacked by something like this, or maybe you're just a person at your house and you may think you may have downloaded the wrong version. You can use any kind of IDS, IPS to put in these indicators here. So this is the actual C2 server that is being talked out to via the malware once it gets downloaded, and this is some amount of other domains that have been seen with this threat actor, right? So you have your FileZilla project, just installed panel, I'm assuming some C2 panel or C panel. And what's kind of scary is there is rnetopera.org, which makes me feel like there's some other campaign that either I missed or like isn't been caught yet, where they're like maybe impersonating an Opera download. I'm not gonna go there right now, but maybe you should, and you should email me about it. Yeah, and these are the files obviously associated, right? You have the hardware monitor. This is the SHA of the sideloaded DLL, and this is the DLL that gets sideloaded. And this is, I think, the same malware, but it gets sideloaded in the FileZilla campaign, right? So kind of neat that like they're seeing not only the same C2, but like the same sideloading technique with the same malware being used across all of these. And this apparently, yeah, this sample goes back all the way to July of 2025. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, and they have really good snort or Yara signatures here too. So if you want to try to figure out if you're like actively compromised by this, literally just put these into your IDS and IPS and you can figure it out. Anyway, guys, as usual, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. If you like this video, hit that like button and let me know what else you want to see on this channel. What else do you want me to cover? What other stuff do you want me to talk about? Let me know down there. Now, before you go, I did make a video about a malware campaign that we saw that was just like this with some really interesting obfuscation techniques. If you want to check that out, the video is right here. You're still here. Go click. Okay, goodbye.